Welcome to the debate. Imagine raising a sum of money equal to the gross domestic product of Japan and Germany combined. Not to fund a nation, not to back a global currency, but simply to build computer chips. That is the sheer scale of Sam Altman's ambition.
Right, and if you're listening to this right now, you probably use GBTG. You see this sleek, simple interface, but what you don't see is the burning of billions of dollars in computational power on the back end, or, frankly, the unprecedented geopolitical maneuvering required to sustain it.
Exactly. Which brings us to the central question of our discussion today. Is Sam Altman building a necessary, vertically integrated technological infrastructure to usher in an era of unprecedented global abundance?
Or is he orchestrating an unprecedented centralization of power and wealth, while actively dismantling traditional oversight and accountability?
We are drawing today's debate directly from a massive cache of recent analyses and internal documents. We're unpacking the OpenAI files, detailing their internal governance crises, the New Yorker's deep dive into his soft power, and his essay, Moore's Law for Everything.
Yeah, and we can't forget the company's highly controversial pivot away from its nonprofit roots to a public benefit corporation.
Right, so I will argue that Altman is a pragmatic visionary. He's acting as a necessary, wartime CEO whose unprecedented scale and aggressive tactics are the only way to safely navigate the transition to artificial general intelligence, or AGI.
And I will argue that Altman has executed a Machiavellian consolidation of power. He has become an algorithmic sovereign who uses the rhetoric of safety to build an impenetrable compute moat entirely free from real accountability.
Let's lay out the groundwork here and jump into the history. When I look at his actions over the past few years, I view them through the lens of necessary, unprecedented scale. You simply cannot build the physical infrastructure for AI using the quaint, operational blueprints of a Web 2.0 software startup.
I mean, sure, but at what cost?
Well, look at the highly publicized November 2023 board turbulence. People called it workplace drama or a hostile takeover. It was a necessary system reset to align the company's governance with the massive state-level scale required to actually achieve AGI. I see why you think that it's a power grab, but let me give you a different perspective. You are looking at the friction of a systemic evolution and mistaking it for malice.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. What you were describing as a system reset is actually a masterclass in what I would call credential laundering.
Credential laundering?
Yes, Altman brilliantly uses this utopian persona of AI safety and wealth redistribution to obscure what is, mechanically, a classic monopolization of power. The 2023 board coup wasn't a reset to help humanity, it was the coronation of a sovereign who now answers to absolutely no one.
That's a huge leap.
The evidence is structural and overwhelming. We have former chief scientist Ilya Sutskever's 52-page internal memo documenting a consistent pattern of psychological manipulation, creating what is essentially a black box of leadership, plus his multi-year concealment of his personal ownership of the OpenAI startup fund from his own board.
I want to dive straight into the fiduciary mechanics of that board firing and rehiring, because your entire premise relies on the idea that the old board was this functional off switch that Altman maliciously destroyed. You call it a coronation. I call it a stress test that proved a fundamentally broken oversight model had to collapse.
It proved the off switch was broken because Altman deliberately broke it. We really need to look at how he operated under that 501c3 nonprofit board. That board's fiduciary duty was literally to humanity. That was the only safeguard we had, and how did he treat them?
They were moving too slowly for the market.
Former board member Helen Toner revealed that the board literally had to learn about the launch of ChatGPT on Twitter. Think about the mechanics of that. The most consequential consumer product launch in modern history, and the board is scrolling social media to find out it went live.
Which points to a massive disconnect between a slow-moving academic board and a hyper-growth tech company.
No, it points to information asymmetry as a weapon. Toner stated explicitly that Altman systematically withheld information. And you cannot ignore Ilya Sutskever's memo. This wasn't just a disgruntled employee. This was a co-founder detailing how Altman would say one thing to one executive, a different thing to another, and just weaponize the chaos.
But when he was fired...
When he was fired, his condition for returning wasn't just resuming his job. He demanded the immediate resignation of the very board members who dared to exercise their legal oversight authority. That is the literal definition of removing your own accountability.
You are focusing entirely on the interpersonal friction and completely ignoring the structural validation of his leadership. After the board fired him, a massive independent review was conducted by the law firm WilmerHale,
which was never fully released.
They reviewed over 30,000 internal documents and conducted dozens of interviews. Their conclusion was that while there was a breakdown in trust, Altman's conduct did not mandate removal. Furthermore, you're ignoring the democratic reality inside that building. 738 people, which was 95% of OpenAI's employees, threatened to quit immediately unless he was reinstated. That is a clear mandate from the engineers building the technology.
Oh, let's be clear about how that mandate was manufactured. It was born of an ultimatum. The employees were told that if Altman didn't return, the company would collapse and their highly lucrative equity would evaporate overnight. It was a financial hostage situation, not an election.
If he is truly a Machiavellian sovereign who brooks absolutely no dissent, why retain Adam D'Angelo from the previous board? Why willingly subject himself to a WilmerHale investigation in the first place? You are looking at a messy stress test of a novel governance structure. You had a nonprofit board trying to manage a capped profit entity that required billions of dollars and compute. The system reset fixed the structural flaw so they could actually execute.
It fixed the flaw by ensuring the CEO can never be fired again. He removed the friction by removing the brakes.
But let's look at why he needed to remove that friction. Let's move into the economics and look through the economist's lens, because this is where the sheer physical scale of his vision truly justifies the streamlined structure. We are facing a severe global GPU bottleneck. Right now, NVIDIA essentially has a monopoly on the architectural design of the hardware.
Right, and TSMC manufactures them.
Exactly. So Altman's ambition to raise $7 trillion to build a global network of AI chip factories, partnering with the UAE, is the only pragmatic way to solve this physical supply chain crisis. No one else is thinking on this infrastructural scale.
Because no one else is trying to build a private, vertical monopoly over human cognition.
It is a structural necessity, and it connects directly to his Moore's Law for Everything thesis. He understands that AGI is going to drive the cost of cognitive labor to near zero. He's proposing an American equity fund, a 2.5% tax on companies, to pay citizens $13,500 annually. He is attempting to coordinate the macroeconomic infrastructure required to save the global economy.
I appreciate the utopian rhetoric, but let's look at the actual economic mechanisms he is deploying on the ground right now. He isn't democratizing compute. He is building an impenetrable compute moat. And regarding his utopian wealth redistribution, let's look closely at the Universal Basic Income pilot program conducted by Open Research, which he heavily backed.
The UBI pilot generated essential data.
Economist Guy Standing rigorously critiqued this pilot. It wasn't a true universal basic income at all. It was a heavily means-tested transfer that completely ignored the reality of poverty traps, where receiving a small amount of cash actually causes vulnerable people to lose access to other vital social benefits, leaving them worse off. It was a brilliant PR exercise.
You are conflating the messy reality of iterative pilot programs with the ultimate end goal. A pilot program with 1,000 people generates raw data so you can figure out how to build the real thing at a federal level. If you were building a transcontinental railroad, you don't judge the entire endeavor by the first mile of track laid in the dirt.
Okay, but
the global chip market is only about $520 billion today. Someone has to coordinate the trillions needed for that AGI transition. Who else has the network, the capital access, and the vision to actually do it?
But look at how he manages the wealth his company generates right now. While preaching capitalism for everyone, OpenAI recently transitioned to a public benefit corporation. They are dropping the original 100x profit cap for investors. They are offering uncapped equity.
That's just market reality to raise capital.
And most egregiously,
We learned that Altman personally authorized highly restrictive, non-disparagement agreements. These agreements threatened to legally claw back millions of dollars in vested equity from departing employees if they dared to criticize the company's safety practices. He claimed total ignorance, blaming administrative oversight.
Which he fixed.
That was until Vox obtained the actual incorporation documents bearing his physical signature. How does enforcing a multi-million-dollar financial gag order on your own safety researchers align with Moore's Law for everyone?
He acknowledged the mistake with the non-disparagement clauses, and crucially, he walked them back. As a wartime CEO operating at breakneck speed, administrative delegations happen. When the error was surfaced, it was corrected. None of that equity was actually clawed back. The transition to a public benefit corporation is simply an acknowledgement of market reality. The nonprofit structure was literally starving the company of the capital required to actually achieve its stated mission.
It's remarkably convenient how it is always an administrative mistake right up until the moment the internal documents leak to the press. Which brings us perfectly to how he handles future risks. Altman operates as what I would call a technological ambassador. He flies around the world, taking meetings with heads of state in Dubai at the World Government Summit.
How is engaging with global leaders laundering?
Because of the duality of his messaging. He sits down under oath in front of the U.S. Senate. He looks lawmakers directly in the eye, speaks in a measured tone, and says he actively welcomes regulation. He even asks for a brand new federal agency. It sounds incredibly responsible.
Because safety is the priority.
But simultaneously, behind closed doors, his company is quietly lobbying to water down the EU AI Act. They actively opposed California's SB 1047, a bill specifically designed to hold developers legally liable for downstream harm. He uses the illusion of begging for regulation to pull up the ladder behind him, crushing open-source competitors who can't afford armies of compliance lawyers.
I see the tension there, absolutely. But you have to understand the geopolitical environment he is navigating. Fragmented, slow-moving state regulatory apparatuses are actually far riskier than centralizing the effort. California's SB 1047 would have chilled innovation. Is it credential laundering, or is it simply the reality of building a technology that functions like a new global utility?
It's monopolization.
Let me expand on an analogy. If you were building the world's first commercial nuclear reactor, you do not let local municipal zoning boards dictate the physics of enriched uranium. You operate as a state-level entity because the fallout radius and the stakes are state-level. He is interacting directly with heads of state because AGI is a supreme geopolitical asset.
That analogy perfectly illustrates my point, but you're missing the crucial half of it. A commercial nuclear reactor has federal inspectors. It is governed by a nuclear regulatory commission with the legal authority to walk into the control room and literally shut the reactor down. Altman is actively fighting the creation of any independent entity that holds a real off switch.
He's ensuring the project survives.
You call him a state-level entity, but a state has a constitution. It has democratic accountability. Sam Altman has a hand-picked, friendly board and uncapped equity. He testified to the Senate that he had no financial interest in OpenAI, but we later learned he held indirect equity through Y Combinator and for years concealed his legal ownership of the OpenAI startup fund. He is operating with the influence of a nation-state, but with the transparency of a shell company.
The indirect equity through previous incubator funds was entirely incidental to his past roles, and he sold that stake when it became a distraction. As for the startup fund, it was a structural workaround because the nonprofit board was moving too slowly. Let's look at the alternative here. If he doesn't marshal these trillions of dollars, who gets there first?
Here we go.
A fragmented open source community that is structurally incapable of securing the models, or a hostile state actor without any of our democratic values? In that context, his centralization isn't a power grab. It is a defensive necessity for the West.
That right there is the ultimate trump card used to justify every single monopolistic power grab in Silicon Valley history. If I don't do it, someone worse will. It is the ultimate shield against accountability. Is the architect actually aligning this world-altering machine with humanity, or is he just aligning it with himself?
And this is exactly why this conversation is so critical. To summarize my position in light of our discussion, Sam Altman's unprecedented scale from conceptualizing $7 trillion physical supply chains to proposing massive wealth redistribution, requires an unprecedented, unified leadership structure. The turbulence we are seeing is all just the necessary friction of building a future of total abundance. You can't build the cognitive transcontinental railroad of the 21st century by committee.
And to summarize my perspective, the mechanics and the evidence clearly point to a systematic dismantling of accountability, from manipulating his own fiduciary board members to shedding the nonprofit structure to constructing an insurmountable compute mode. The sovereign of Silicon has successfully removed his own off switch.
Well, I think we can both agree that examining these differing perspectives reveals the vast complexity of the material. There are no easy answers when you are dealing with a technology that will fundamentally alter the economic and political fabric of humanity.
Absolutely. The engineering of the neural networks is really only half the story. The engineering of the power dynamics around those networks will ultimately determine how it impacts our daily lives.
Which leaves us with one final, unavoidable thought to carry with you. If Sam Altman ultimately achieves artificial general intelligence, does the concept of trust even matter anymore?